Good evening. You're listening to Adrenaline Radio, 1680 AM on your dial. I'm Fred Blanchard, host of Adrenaline Motorsports. We have an in-studio guest from Keith Black Racing Engines, Ken Black. He's our guest for the evening. And basically, I'm going to ask poor old Ken here a little bit about how all of this got started. But first of all, I did want to let you know that Keith Black Racing Engines is located in Southgate, California, and they offer the same performance products that they did back when I started the sport of drag racing, and they're still, as a family-operated a business, and Ken, of course, is in charge of the facility, and they produce the latest in product, engine blocks of the forged kind, which several builders are out there doing that now. And but Ken is one of the premier manufacturers of that type of an engine block for hardcore drag racing, and a variety of other water-jacketed blocks. I'm quite sure that he still builds the KB Oldsmobile and the Chevy block. I'm sure all that is still produced out of your facility. Ken, welcome to the program. I'd like very much to introduce you and kind of allow you to get started here in regards to some history of the company. And welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Fred. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me on. It's really a pleasure to be here. And have to thank Mrs. Black, my mom. She's back at the shop kind of watching things after you drug me out of there for a while.
This is very true, and it took forever to do that. I realize that. One of the things that really impressed me is that it's still a family business, and I wanted you to shed a little light on that, if you would, please, of how it's evolved from the early days as to what's going on today.
Yeah, it always has been. Well, it's more now, of course, than it was when it started out in the early years. It really wasn't even an engine deal. My grandfather had a auto parts selling deal. He went around to different service stations and sold, screwdrivers and batteries and stuff too. And he had 5 sons, and he wanted his sons involved in it. So he enlisted his older son. That was my Uncle Tom. And then my dad later on. So I think Tom kind of lost interest in it, and so it was my grandfather and dad, and it was KB Auto Parts. That's what it ended up being. But it was Mike Black and Son Auto Parts originally. But that kind of started the whole thing, and my dad used to run parts on the truck from service station to service station, and at night he'd come home and work on his hobby, which was racing boats, and do that at all hours of the night outside.
What part of town was this in?
We lived in Linwood in California, just it's a little closer.
Yes, a little south of Southgate, in other words.
Yeah, it's a little bit southwest of Southgate and stuff. So we grew up, and Dad built onto the back of the house and stuff there, and built garages and stuff to support the auto parts deal, plus his hobby, as they say.
Well, what kind of boats did he work on?
Well, he had his own. He had a hydroplane. They were, using flathead Fords and stuff at that time. And he also had I'm trying to remember what the class was on it. It wasn't the hydro, though. It was
K boats. Something like
it wasn't
that.
even a K boat. It was before the K boats out. But
where did they run these boats?
Marine Stadium was a real popular place at the time, and Salton Sea also. But I remember right before I was born. In fact, Dad, my mom was expecting with me. They had my sister already, and they're waiting for my mom to.
Bring you along,
present me into the world, as you might say.
Bring you along. Okay, that's
and
cool.
the wonderful day happened and stuff, and Dad brought Mom home, dropped her off at the front deal, hooked the trailer, and said, "I'm going off the Salton Sea to set a record," and he left.
Well, typical racer mentality. I can see that.
Yeah, and the great part was he came back and had the trophy. Actually, did set the record, but Mom was not too pleased.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but I can imagine how it must have gone. But
well, I resemble some of those remarks. I was exposed to the same thing, I think. Very cool. So basically you started up in the Southern California area there in the Linwood area of south side, or basically around Huntington Park, Southgate, and that whole area, Compton.
Yeah, it was really Dad's hobby, and just he did it as a pleasure thing, and made his living selling the auto parts that my grandfather had started and that. And what happened a couple of times was at the races he was racing. The guys were giving him kind of a hard time. He wasn't really a pro racer. He won a lot of trophies and won a lot of stuff, but there were guys out that were real driver guys. And one of the guys that was really a hot shoot at the time, Bobby Sykes, came to my dad and said, those guys are really giving you a hard time. Why don't you let me drive your boat one time? And Dad, man, he looked up at Bobby, was like, wow, you do that? And Dad was just in awe that he would even come over and offer to do that, because Dad thought really highly of Bobby and his skills. He went out and about lapped the field, and everybody came back and said, Keith, what'd you do to your boat? He says, well, I put a driver in it. And that and a couple of close calls with accidents and the boat on fire and him hanging on the sponson kind of ended his driving career. And he figured, I'm just not meant to be a driver, and started concentrating on building boats. And when he did, the guys he did work for, their boats started winning and running really good, and just kind of evolved from that.
Wow. And how did he get involved? What in the power plant part of the boat racing and that kind of thing? Was he running just what was out there, basically?
Yeah, pretty much flathead stuff you get from the junkyard and that, and they, like everybody else used to do, and they worked on that, and pretty much that's all it was at that time. And the other stuff didn't really start coming in until he got into doing the drag racing stuff with the 392s and that. Yeah, the drag racing field, I think that in its infancy is when we started. I, as a spectator at one time, and then watching the cars of what we thought were the future. They, as you say, they started out with flatheads and that type of thing in the Santa Ana days, and then later evolved to strips like Lyons and Fontana and places like that, San Fernando. And the cars became a little more sophisticated. But when did he start involving himself with the dragsters? That was one of the things I wanted to ask. Yeah, well, and toward the, it would have been the 60s and stuff, they were starting to use some of the 392s and the boats and that, and Dad had a lot of boats that had set world records, and it really made an impression on some people, and one of them was Tommy Greer, and he wanted to go race. He came over to my dad's, I want to go race. Let's, go race. And Dad said, I don't have the money to do that. And Tommy said, well, I'll take care of that. And they went out and they worked and got a car from Louis Center, which was the cash auto sale car. And that car is what became the Greer Black Prud'homme car. But Dad changed the stuff on it, and they went out and ran. The first thing they found out they had a problem was hooking the thing up. It had so much torque in that they couldn't keep the thing, it wouldn't mile per hour or anything. And basically that came from Dad's deal with the boats. The boats had so much more torque, they had to detune it. So he started making de-stroker motors and stuff out of it. And,
wow.
And trying to get so the tires would hook up.
Well, people who don't know Tom Greer, Tom basically was in the machinery business. He was the one that bought and sold machinery for manufacturing. And,
yeah, he did a lot of that.
Yeah, and I not that I knew him, but I knew of him back in the early days of that venue in the machinery business. And then being in the 60s, that was the prime time for a lot of the startup businesses and that type of thing for automotive performance parts. I mean, each time you went out and broke a part, you wanted to create something better. You wanted to build your own part, and the only way you could do it is buy a machine and get creative. And that was kind of how things evolved. That's how the performance business, from what I can tell, started, is that you raced it, and if it didn't work, you went out and created it, and that's what it sounds like to me that your dad and the gang there started pretty much.